Hi, everybody. Welcome to Innovation Nation today. My name is Sarah, and I'm excited to have a very special person with me today, someone who I met in the more recent through our network during COVID, which couldn't have been a better time to meet, especially because we're starting to do some really great things together. So, Tim, if you can please introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hey, everybody. My name is Tim Wenzel, and I work at Facebook. I am the head of global security privacy protection, but that's not how Sarah and I met. Sarah and I met because I work with the group of emerging security leaders called Getting Security Done, or GSD. And we are basically trying to be thought leaders in the industry, but not talking about the things that we normally talk about in security. We want to start having in our view, the more correct, the more relevant conversation aimed at accelerating the advancement of our industry.
Very, very well said. I was going to have us jump to that at some point, and that's a great place to just jump into it, Tim. Regarding GSD and how we met, you mentioned accelerating certain things in the industry, and obviously with acceleration comes change. And I think that from our conversation the other day, you were talking about how a lot of the norms of today are different and how a lot of what we know to be foundational truths are changing. And can you share with us a little bit about your perspective on that concept, especially within security, and how you would implement change within your own teams, especially during COVID?
Yeah, of course. So if you haven't been comfortable with change very much in your life, you're having to become a lot more comfortable with it now, right? During this COVID, I don't know, sometimes I call it the COVID experiment, because I kind of feel like we're in a petri dish somewhere and people are like, let's try this, let's see how this goes. Sometimes I call it the COVID adventure, because I just feel like it's a better way to look at it. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, whether we're in this pandemic or not, we are in a world that is ever changing. Technology is evolving so fast, not just social media, everything. Security technology, although to be honest, it could evolve a lot faster, but it's probably not this conversation. But we have to become comfortable with change. And my background, I started off as a paramedic. Which after I deployed to Iraq with the military for the invasion, I decided I wanted to get into executive protection because I did security while I was over there. And through executive protection, I somehow came to Facebook, which is kind of a crazy, weird story in and of itself. And I got into a place to where meetings about security were no longer meetings about guns, gates, and guards. They were meetings about which port is accessed during what situation. I was like, is there a door and window schedule on that port? What are you talking about? And I very quickly had to adjust my mindset to this new security realm I find myself in. And so lucky for me, I've kind of had to do this before. But now with COVID, the whole term physical security professional, is that even a thing anymore? Is that even an industry? Because we don't have any physical spaces to guard.
Nope, not right now.
So how do we manage this? We need to start thinking of ourselves as security professionals. I actually subscribe to the ESRM philosophy, enterprise security risk management, of kind of tracking down the security risk within an organization, wherever it may lie, and then trying to figure out the best way to manage it. And so as we've done this COVID adventure with my team, well, first I thought, awesome, we're going to get 3 weeks off, everybody. Take the meetings you have to take, get some downtime with the family. I expect you to sleep, and in 3 weeks, we're going to come back ready to roar. And then at the end of 3 weeks, I said, oh, well, we're never going back to the office ever again. And so I had to sit back and say, okay, I run a global program that secures spaces so that people can deal with highly sensitive information. how many of these spaces are being used right now? And I said, wow. Well, the work isn't stopping. The company hasn't shut down. They're still producing a product. They're still hard at work. Where is this super sensitive work being done? And so I started kind of thinking through, and what I ended up doing was I said, well, now's a good time to do a policy audit. And I started reading through our policies and procedures, and I said, wow, these are all false. They don't actually exist anymore, because I assumed we would do this in this type of office environment. I assumed we would do this at this type of event center, and we'd be able to choose this type of space. And then I realized, you know what? I need to write down every foundational assumption I made as I built this program over the last 7 years. And so I did. I walked through all of our policies and procedures. I walked through all the documentation that was current, and I wrote in the margins all the assumptions I had made of how business was going to be done by the company, where business was going to be conducted, the manner, the processes they use. And I found a unique roadmap that these assumptions over here were no longer true.
So when we think about physical security, right, and we think about what we're doing when it comes to a space in which we're securing, and we're saying, oh, well, we're security professionals, and you're finding assumptions that you yourself had made, right? And what is it, 7 years? You mentioned 7 years later, you're now sitting down to look at that. It's kind of mind-blowing, because if you think about it, even to this day, there are policies that this world is following that is way older than 7 years old and have not been looked at for a very long time, where assumptions are being made and our climate just doesn't match those assumptions anymore. And it's an interesting concept, Tim, because you also talk about your team and you have people you have to work with on a regular basis. How are you still collaborating and making your team feel like a true team when we're not physically together right now?
Well, that's a really great question. And this is kind of I think of this in like two parts. Like, one, mapping out the assumptions which are no longer true, and then finding like what is now true.
Right.
And that's a cycle I really want to talk about. But the other half is, now that we're not together as a team, all attending meetings together and brainstorming together physically, we need to make sure that if we haven't done so already, we need to create independent, autonomous teams that have scopes of decision making, that they can autonomously have conversations, make decisions, and report back on the decisions made. And that I've done that over the last few years, just so I could actually take PTO, not even looking at like a pandemic's coming. But if we want to get back to the assumptions, I saw somebody post recently that Kodak didn't go out of business because digital photography became a thing. They actually made one of the first digital cameras. It's just that the revenue on film was so good, they wanted to hold on to it. And Blockbuster didn't go out of business because people stopped watching video content. It's because the late fees were so lucrative. They wanted to keep everything in store. And they did not challenge their assumptions on what was no longer true, how people wanted to consume their product. Mm-hmm. And so this is what we look at with our teams. What assumptions have we made? Have we built our entire programs on that are no longer true? Okay. What part of the business is still conducting their business events with sensitive information, policy and legal summits that are very sensitive? You can go down the list. All sorts of things that companies have to do in a way that applies to their due diligence, to keep their information and their people safe. Now we're doing these things at home. We're doing these things over video conference. And maybe we're even doing things differently than we think. And so as you map that out, that gives you a really interesting conversation to reach out to your business partners and say, how are you doing this now? What is your new normal? And then more importantly, how can I help? And then once they tell you what they're doing now and how you may be helpful, then you ask the third question. How is it going? What problems are you running into? And that's really key, because once you find out that things are kind of going a little bit crappy, I mean, they're okay, we're dealing with it, but this is not great. Why isn't it great? And now security has the opportunity to begin leading the business in the evolution of their business practices down a more secure, user-friendly path. But if we just try to keep up and we don't ask those questions, then we're always going to be lagging, and the business is not going to tell us that they're about to pivot.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple things, and what I'm getting at from hearing what you're, these concepts you're bringing up of being able to be like, it's almost like a predictive approach in a sense, or more so like trying to be a few steps ahead, right? Like instead of being a few steps behind, we have to find a way to lead, right? We're not here to respond, we're here to lead. And I'm curious, like, can you share a little bit around some of those like actual examples of what assumptions may have been made in the past that you're now pivoting on or changing and trying to lead a new path with? I'm curious, like what you, and if you're allowed to share, right? Some of the stuff I know is for your own institution, but what would you say are some general examples of that?
Well, I mean, globally, we are not in the office, any of us really, right? So we're not having events at event centers, which means we're going virtual events, right? So some virtual events like GSX or ISC West, those are basically public forums, right? So that's fine, but they're still going to have sensitive policy, sensitive legal, sensitive product conversations, and they're going to have summits to bring groups of people together to have these. Now, they probably usually do them on site so you can have physical security, make sure that everybody that comes in is supposed to be there, that the prototypes or whatever sensitive handouts or whatever get collected and they don't leave the building, that people aren't taking unauthorized pictures. But now they're doing it on a virtual platform. So how do we help the business understand the risk they're taking on and manage it? So one of the ways is my new job really is 2 or 3 times a week. I call to different regions of the world and different business units and different global security units, and I talk about work from home best practices and social engineering. Because actually now we're at higher risk for social engineering now that we're always at home than we ever have been, because it's easier to get to your home than it is to get into the company.
Oh, that's a whole nother can of worms that you're bringing up right now. It's kind of scary to think about,
It is, but this is a unique opportunity because everybody is in flux and everybody's looking for a guiding light. And this is the time when we can say, hey, this type of activity that you've done at the office, you have to do it at home. We get it. This is not an ideal environment, but here are some tips to make your home a great place or a better place to do this. Here's some security settings you should consider setting your router to. Like, hey, let me ask you a question, Mr. Engineer that graduated college 2 years ago. You have roommates from a competitive company? You do? That's crazy. So now you actually have to work like you're at an outdoor cafe and you have no privacy. So you should be wearing earbuds for all of your meetings. You should be using screen protectors. You should be locking your equipment up at the end of the night. And people are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I was essentially working at another tech company because these people live with me. And so as you start to give out basic bits of advice that help the business make sense of their new reality and their new environment, what happens next? Questions come. Well, Tim, we have to talk about these things. We have to have these events. We have to bring in external customers on what our roadmap is going to be, and we have to stream it out. How are we going to do that? Well, great. Let's have that conversation. Let me go get with the video production teams. Let me go get with the communications teams. Let me go grab all these other business stakeholders, ESRM principal, bring them in to talk about the risk that we have to, in this new environment, we have to take on, and what the best ways, platforms, et cetera, are to manage it. And this has actually been a pretty awesome conversation that I've been having all around the company, all over the world.
It's very interesting, Tim, because something that's coming to mind right now is when you think about technology, right, and what we knew it as like in the past and today and where it's going, and the fact that like this world isn't physical much anymore, right? Everybody, like you're walking down a street, like no one wants to touch anyone. I don't know what it's like where you're at, but like for us in Southern California, you know, no one's going into who goes into their office anymore? You know what I mean? Unless you're an essential worker. And when you're in tech, like now we're in tech, I work for a tech company, I'm fully remote. And, our office is in Redwood City, and it's not a massive office, and we're not planning to have everybody in anymore, right? So the way that we're interacting with technology, utilizing technology, the types of tech that's out there, I mean, I'm seeing things pop up right and left that who knows if they're going to last forever. And then I'm also seeing things kind of dying that we don't need anymore. And I'm curious, like from your perspective, because you're working on a global program, is there anything around technology that's changing, like things that we once did use and need that we don't need anymore? I mean, how are your teams that still do go into the office? Like, how are they surviving? I'm assuming they're not working the buildings at full capacity, but there are some people that still have to go in, right?
I think every company has people that need to go in, but you made an interesting point. You see some things that are dying. I would challenge that assumption. They're evolving. Because nothing is truly dead. The company has made an investment that they expect you to bring a return on their investment. So back to what we were talking about. What is the new normal? How can I help you right now, and how is it going?
Mm-hmm.
Get really granular with that feedback and start to think like a user experience engineer, or go talk to a user experience engineer if you have one around and say, hey, I'm trying to design for this problem. They're kind of bored because they're not doing a bunch of user studies right now. And you know what? You can say, okay, we've pivoted to this for these reasons. And it's really important to identify this is what we've done for these reasons. Here's how security protocol has protected this operation in the past. We've pivoted for these reasons, nullifying these security precautions. Mm-hmm. What new gaps exist? The customer experience is 50-50. They've told me X, Y, Z are still problems and they want to solve for them. And yet these security vulnerabilities are still open. How can I take the next step, now that we've already pivoted, to say, create a better user experience, close security gaps? And this is a conversation that whether you're dealing with an integrator or you have in-house security technology people, you know what? I'm on calls now with the people that design Zoom and Blue Jeans and whatever, saying, hey, so no longer acceptable for most conversations in these realms, right? Because we can't bring people on site. So how can we do these types of things to make it more secure, to make sure that people aren't listening, to make sure that people can't take pictures of or screenshots as easy as they can of what's being talked about, right? Because these are the types of things that we really need to be aware of. And at the end of the day, business will return to normal. And if we follow this path of challenging assumptions, looking at what we're doing, user experience, and where we need to go, we will be walking hand in hand with the business to what normal looks like. Because we can ask, hey, we need to make this investment for security for right now, but what does it look like in 6 months? Well, I don't know what it looks like in 6 months. Okay, what does it look like in a year? What is the return to normal looking like right now? Mm-hmm. Is the investment worthwhile based on what's going to be happening then? And you start to lead the business down these conversations, which creates buy-in. And you are now, as a physical security professional, you're walking hand in hand with the business. You're giving them a deliverable. You're advising them on the risk and what they should be doing with these sensitive operations. Wow. And, with all of these thermal cameras that can detect fevers and the different robotics and stuff out there, there's a lot of additional there's a lot of additional room for technology to expand if we do it right and if we look at the long term.
So do you have any examples? Like I have some that I've been learning about, but I'm curious if you have any that you're seeing as your future plan or the rollout for going back to work, anything you're seeing that's being considered now that maybe we would have never considered before from a technology perspective?
I don't really work in the technology part of the field. Like my specific role has technology that we use. And so I guess we are looking towards what can we use that can monitor an environment without people being there, that can help us understand what's going on, whether it's a baseline of normal or it's different or nefarious or just a disruption. Because now we're in the place where people aren't really using the offices, but sometimes they do for important things because now there's less people, and so they can make the case, hey, we can do this here safely. But who's been watching the area? Who's been making sure that the employees that are there, the janitorial staff that are doing these deep cleans, are treating the place right? So, I mean, that's one thing that we're looking at now. But that will also help us in the future scale our operations. What are you seeing?
Well, that's, you literally just, right when you said operations, that's when my ears perked because you hit it on the dot. So what I'm seeing is not as much. So, okay, what I'm seeing is a marriage finally between technology and operations. And what I mean by that is finally I'm seeing people think about why we actually need something. Like you were saying earlier, is this worth an investment? The 6-month, 12-month, 3-year, 5-year, the decisions we're making today looking forward, we have to think them through. And so what's interesting is I'm not seeing people buy card readers to buy card readers. I'm seeing people really shift the way that they vet technology for specific use cases of value. Is this going to make my workflow easier? Is this going to be a seamless, safe experience for my users within the building? Are we going to be able to eliminate germ transfer by implementing X, Y, and Z? It sounds silly. There is actually a technology I did see come out, and I'm going to tell you about this one. This is a very simple concept, and it's one in which I think was executed very beautifully. And what these people did was they took the concept of the vending machine and they said, we're gonna take a vending machine and we're gonna make it smart and we're gonna make it sterile and we're gonna put into it hand sanitizer and masks. And it sounds silly. It sounds like a very silly concept. But what they did with it, with the automatic replenishment and sensors built in so it knows when it needs to order more, and you have one like at the front in the office when someone walks in, so the folks who still go in, I forget my mask. Well, here you are. You can get your hand sanitizer and your mask together. It's safe, it's clean. And now me as the building owner, I've taken an effort to make my people feel safer and better, right? Entering within that environment. And as silly as it seems and sounds, operationally, you're making the actual workflow easier for those people too, right? When they're going about their days, like I go to the grocery store, I forget my mask all the time. You know how much time I spend forgetting it and then remembering it and then going back to my car and then getting it? It's like I could save like a matter of 5 minutes every day if you do the math. 5 to 10 minutes every day, 7 days a week. That's an hour at least of time that I'm wasting. If I could stop thinking about that and know that there's parameters in place, so I don't have to think twice and I could keep going about my day. That's an example to me of an operational efficiency, how we're going to evolve with the times, but find ways to help life stay kind of normal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. And that kind of goes back to something I mentioned earlier about who would have thought video conference platforms are now security tools, right? Because we used to pen test them to make sure that they were safe from outsiders. But now, how do we do sensitive presentations and protect that? Like, how are we working with these engineers to create better platforms that guard information? And you know what else is interesting? I had something.
You were bringing up, you're talking about Zoom, or you're talking about like, video calls. That's another one because, you know, I how do I put this lightly? You can't control what somebody does at their home. And where does the buck stop, right? Like as the larger organization, at what point do you get it came back to you?
Yeah, you actually put me right on track.
Okay, let's hear
So
it.
now I'm exploring, hey, we've sent everybody home. We've taken the liability of people doing possibly sensitive work that falls under government regulation at home. What is a new code of conduct for employees forced to do work at home? And then let me ask you another question. What is a new code of conduct for employees that are allowed? Because going back to the office, we're not going to bring everybody back, right? Everybody is embracing this work from home for a while. What does it look like to be individually responsible for company assets when you don't actually tie them to an office, when you're working with sensitive information or sensitive topics that fall under a government regulation? And those are other really interesting conversations that you were kind of getting to, it sounds like, that we should really be helping the business think through. Because, in security, we don't enforce any rules. That's not our role. That's HR and legal. So, but we need to guide them down the path of what they need to be thinking about in order to make sure that employees are treating the company's assets correctly.
Well, one of the things I think, and maybe this is a note for us to stop on, but at the same time, I feel like we can talk for hours. And that's also, just so the listeners do know, I will be bringing Tim back for part B. We have a whole nother topic we're going to bring up that has to do with industry. But I will say, I want to share this. I mean, one of the things I found very interesting when COVID hit, and I know like everybody talks about COVID now. I know it's like kind of the annoying topic to talk about. I get that people are kind of over it. But at the same time, what's interesting is for so long, the physical security industry and like the physical security folks, security leaders, I wouldn't say we were a day two, but we were never like, it was kind of this thing in the background, right? That you just knew they were there to keep you safe, right? But once COVID came out and everything started changing with the world, what I learned and what I noticed and realized, especially my end users, was people were going to security by default, assuming security had it all figured out. As if, COVID is an issue now. It's this threat. It's a physical threat to us. What do we do?
No, and that's really interesting. And, this goes in cycles. We know things, but we forget them because they're not a thing until they become a thing again. And so when I was, before I came to Facebook, I was a tactical instructor or law enforcement instructor at the State Department. And I was teaching diplomats how to be safe when they were in Iraq. And this little thing called Benghazi happened, and they said, oh my gosh, we need more training on keeping people safe. And so my small team, the team that I was a part of, we created all this new training, and they said, it's very important that we need to train them for when fire is used as a weapon, because we had all these ballistic things, we had all of these things, but they lit the place on fire. And with enough time, that starts to defeat things, that makes people come out. And we've always known that's true, but it hadn't really happened in a while, and so we stopped defending for it. We've always known that disease and viruses can be used as a weapon, not just by governments, but by anybody, right? And now we're in this pandemic. What assumptions are no longer true? That, hey, if somebody doesn't ransomware you, they instead get access to your entire company's distribution list and say, hey, we've had 30 COVID outbreaks in the last 2 days at your biggest office. What does that do? It scares. It's an act of terrorism. It scares your people. So we need to start thinking about, we're dealing with this now, but when we return to a new normal, how will health or sickness be used as a weapon? And we need to start planning for that.
Well, one last thing, I mean, just to touch on, when you just said the word virus, it's so funny because, you know, that's we talk technology and Innovation Nation, but I thought when you first said virus, it's so funny because my initial instinct to think what you mean by a virus was a computer virus, like
Not anymore.
cybersecurity. And it's literally say no more, right? It just makes you like there's a reason why we named that. And now we're realizing what an actual virus is and what it can do and how it could be used. My assumption was not what's actually happening.
But assumptions are no longer true. And that's actually the power of that little question. You can ask it of your teams. You can ask it of the business. Hey, I want to ask you a question. Then what assumptions, business person, legal person, coder, engineer, what assumptions are no longer true for you that are really screwing up your business? We've done an audit. Here are some of ours. Walk them down memory lane and help them understand where you've had to shift to and why. And they'll be like, yeah, that totally makes sense. And, oh my gosh, they may actually sympathize with us, which is insane. The business never sympathizes with us because they're under the same constraints, but it may invoke them to have a very conscious audit of their new environment because they've pivoted and they may not even realize all the ways they pivoted and how it affects the business or their relationship with you. It's such a powerful question. And I think we all really do need to be asking it of ourselves, of our peers, of our reports, and of the business.
It's a great reminder and it's a great concept. So I'm really happy, Tim, that we had this conversation today and you joined me today because, you know, it's something too I get to now bring back into my real life. I'm going to think about it in anything you do. It's always good to ask yourself that as a reminder. Why are we doing things the way we do them? What assumptions are we making? How can we change? How can we innovate? How can we be better? And how can we ultimately make the world a safer place, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? Technology is great. Tactics are great. But I really get into these mindset conversations because at the end of the day, you can buy the best technology. But if you don't apply it correctly, it's useless.
It's how you
and so it's the mindset of what is the most important thing? What do we need to solve for? And so I hope this conversation kind of helps whoever's watching this kind of re-examine where they are and where their role and their organization and physical security, if that can even be a thing anymore, is going.
I'm so thankful that you came on today and that you joined me to talk about this because I do believe, especially during this time right now, this is going to be very applicable to a lot of people out there. And just for those listening, as you all know, we mentioned Tim works for a very amazing organization we know as Facebook. But either way, if you want to just meet Tim and get to know him, I really recommend reaching out and shooting him a note on LinkedIn. That's how we met, through our network. And I couldn't be happier that you are now part of, you know, my team and I'm a part of your team and we get to be a part
Absolutely.
of GSD together. It's going to be fun. And I can't wait for the day, Tim, that we all could be together and get back in the room and have a GSD talk, because for those of you who are out there also, we do have GSD talks as part of the inside. So if you do ever want to listen in, Tim is leading those as well. So.
And also GSD Fails, which just kicked off, which is possibly more interesting right now than GSD Talks because they're stories of people overcoming adversity.
Oh, that's a great point. So you just launched this week, right? Or was it end of last week?
Late last week, the first episode watched, and I just reposted it today.
I saw
I expected to like it and comment.
Absolutely, I will. I'm going to go listen to it this afternoon. And thank you so much again, Tim, for joining me. And we will see you soon for part B.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.